This is Mrs. Smith, and it's nature study, and we're going to get ready to read about weasels. But first, let's talk about the moons. By the way, happy Easter, and may God bless you this April, and may you be holding fast and having some adventures and good quality family time. Stay healthy and well. All right, April. The first quarter after the new moon was on the 1st of April. The light is on the right, and it is getting brighter. And then we went into waxing gibbouses last week, and we continued with waxing gibbouses all the way until it became a full moon on Tuesday, the 7th of April. I didn't actually look at the moon on Tuesday, but I did on Sunday and Monday, and it looked just about full to me. Then we start to wane, and the light gets dimmer and smaller, so to speak. Not necessarily dimmer, but smaller. And the light is on the left. And now we're going to be heading towards a new moon, which will be right on Earth Day, the 22nd. But the light's on the left, and we're gibbosing all the way until the 14th, which will be the third quarter of the way through the cycle. And you'll have a half moon, and the light is on the left. Okay? I'm just going to show you my hand-drawn April for those that are trying to fill it all the way in. Okay. And you know that the full moon in April is called a pink moon. And I think I told you last time it's because of a flower that blooms in the spring, a ground cover called phlox, and some of its flowers are pink. Okay. Now, get something to draw. This is a vicious creature, weasel. I never knew how vicious they were. So we're going to start off by reading about where some of this takes place. The story takes place, it starts out in a tamarack swamp. Now, tamarack is a deciduous pine tree. I call them larches. And we've had a couple, at least one at every school. There's one at the top of the cemetery on the right after all the sugar maples and after the white pine, but going that way. And then there was one in the school area that was closer to Bethlehem, and there was a tall, straight pole-looking pine tree that lost its needles during the winter. It does not keep its needles. They go yellow and they fall off the tree. So it's a deciduous pine tree. Here is a picture up here. They have the cutest little pine cones. And their groupings are 10 to 20 in a grouping. And they fall off. So, and they can grow in a wide variety of soils, including swampy, acidic soil. And that's why this talks about being in a tamarack swamp. One of the birds it talks about is a grouse. I think a lot of them look a little like pheasants. I haven't quite figured out how to take a picture and get it into my classroom. I have to work on that yet, and then maybe I can get some pictures of things that I think would help you. And I don't have a picture of a grouse. Right. The Weasel. And I'm reading out of Squirrels and Other Fur Bearers by John Burroughs. My most interesting note of the season of 1893 relates to a weasel. One day in early November, my boy and I were sitting on a rock at the edge of a tamarack swamp in the woods, hoping to get a glimpse of some grouse, which we knew were in the habit of feeding in the swamp. We had not sat there very long before we heard a slight rustling in the leaves below us, which we at once fancied was made by the cautious tread of a grouse. We had no gun. Presently, through the thick, brushy growth, we caught sight of a small animal running along that we at first took for a red squirrel. A moment more, and it came into full view, but a few yards from us, and we saw that it was a weasel. A second glance showed that it carried something in its mouth, which, sorry, I lost my place. You know that happens to me frequently. As it drew near, we saw was a mouse or a mole of some sort. So the weasel has a mouse or mole in its mouth. The weasel ran nimbly along. Now the length of he ran nimbly along, now the length of a decayed log, then over stones and branches, pausing a moment every 3 or 4 yards, and behind some rocks on the bank at the edge of the swamp. "He is carrying food into his den," I said. "Let us watch him." In 4 or 5 minutes, he reappeared, coming back over the course along which he had just passed, running over and under the same stones and down the same decayed log, and very soon out of sight in the swamp. We had not moved, and evidently he had not noticed us. After about 6 minutes, we heard the same rustle as at first, and in a moment saw the weasel coming back with another mouse in his mouth. He kept to his former route as if chained to it, making the same pauses and gestures and repeating exactly the former, and after a few moments of delay, reemerged and took his course down into the swamp again. We waited about the same length of time as before, when back he came with another mouse. He evidently had a big crop of mice down there amid the bogs and bushes, and he was gathering his harvest in very industriously. We became curious to see exactly where his den was, and so walked around where he had seemed to disappear each time and waited. He was as punctual as usual and was back with his game exactly on time. It happened that we had stopped within 2 paces of his hole, so that as he approached it, he evidently discovered us. He paused, looked steadily at us, and then, without any sign of fear, entered his den. The entrance was not under the rocks, as we had expected to find it, but was in the bank. And it was in the bank a few feet beyond the rocks. And we remained motionless for some time, but he did not reappear. Our presence had made him suspicious, and he was going to wait a while. Then I removed some dry leaves and exposed his doorway, a small round hole, hardly as large as the chipmunk makes, going straight down into the ground. We had a lively curiosity to get a peep into his larder. Larder, pantry, that's what I was thinking. If he had been carrying in mice at this rate very long, his cellars must be packed with them. With a sharp stick, I began digging into the red clayey soil, but soon encountered so many roots from near trees that I gave it up, deciding to return the next day with a mattock. Mattock looks like a pickaxe, like a hoe, with 2 sides going out from a pole. Pickaxe kind of looking thing. I guess John Burroughs is going to be digging this weasel house up. I've seen some of my students stick sticks into animal burrows, trying to see how far they go and what angle they go, and maybe get a peek at the animal. Well, he's doing the same thing, only wait till you see what he does. Oh my goodness. Before he leaves, he repairs the damages by replacing the leaves, and they went off. The next day, which was mild and still, I came back prepared as I thought to unearth the weasel and his treasures. What's Mr. Burrows trying to get a peek at? The weasel? The tunnels? Or his pantry? Yeah, I think he wants to see where all those mice are stored. I sat down where we had sat the day before, and I awaited developments. I was curious to know if the weasel was still carrying in his harvest. I had sat but a few minutes when I heard again the rustle in the dry leaves, and I saw the weasel coming home with another mouse. I observed him till he had made 3 trips. Now I'm going to try and make sure you can see the author's picture of the weasels. Pause there a second. I calculated that he. Well, I'm sorry. I observed him till he had made 3 trips about every 6 or 7 minutes. I calculated that he had brought in a mouse. Then I went and I stood near his hole. This time he had a fat meadow mouse. He laid it down near the entrance. The weasel went in and turned around and reached out and drew the mouse in after him. That store of mice I am bound to see, I thought, and then I fell to with the heavy mattock. Remember, it's like a pickaxe. I followed the hole down about 2 feet when it turned to the north. I kept the clue by thrusting into the passage slender twigs. These it was easy to follow. 2 or 3 feet more, and the hole branched, one part going west, the other northwest. I followed the west one a few feet till it branched. Then I turned to the easterly tunnel and pursued it till it branched. I followed one of these ways till it divided. I began to be embarrassed and hindered by the accumulations of loose soil. Evidently, this weasel had foreseen just such an assault upon his castle as I was making, and had planned it accordingly. He was not to be caught napping. I found several enlargements in the various tunnels, breathing spaces or spaces to turn around in or to meet and chat with a companion, but nothing that looked like a terminus, a permanent living room. I tried removing the soil a couple of paces away with the mattock, but found it slow work. I was getting warm and tired, and my task was apparently only just begun. The further I dug, the more numerous and intricate became the passages. I concluded to stop, and came again the next day, armed with a shovel, in addition to the mattock. So now he has a pickaxe and a shovel. He's serious. Accordingly, I came back on the morrow and fell to work vigorously. I soon had quite a large excavation. I found the bank a labyrinth of passages, with here and there a large chamber. One of the latter I struck only 6 inches under the surface by making a fresh breach a few feet away, like a hole through the soil. While I was leaning upon my shovel handle and recovering my breath, I heard some light-footed creature tripping over the leaves above me, just out of view, which I fancied might be a squirrel. Presently I heard the bay of a hound and the yelp of a cur, and then knew that a rabbit had passed near me. The dogs came hurrying after with a great rumpus, and then presently the hunters followed. The dogs remained barking not many rods south of me on the edge of the swamp. And remember when we read about the squirrels? A rod is approximately 5 yards. So 10, 15 yards away, all this racket is happening. For half an hour or more, I heard the hunters at work there. They had cornered the rabbit, and he's in his hole. They're trying to dig their game out. Then they came along and discovered me at my work. They proved to be an old trapper and a woodsman and his son. I told them what I was in quest of. A mountain weasel, said the old man. 7 or 8 years ago, I used to set dead falls for rabbits just over there, and the game was always partly eaten up. It must have been this weasel that visited my traps. So my game was evidently an old resident of the place. This swamp, maybe, had been his hunting ground for many years, and he had added another hall to his dwelling each year. After further digging, I struck at least one of his banqueting halls, a cavity about the size of one's hat, arched over by a network of fine tree roots. The occupant evidently lodged or rested here also. There was a warm, dry nest made of leaves and the fur of mice and moles. I took out 2 or 3 handfuls. In finding this chamber, I had followed one of the tunnels around till it brought me within a foot of the original entrance. A few inches to one side of this cavity, there was what I took to be a back alley where the weasel drew his waist. There were large masses of wet, decaying fur here and fur pellets, such as are regurgitated by hawks and owls. In the nest, there was the tail of a flying squirrel, showing that the weasel sometimes had this game for supper or dinner. All right, so it looks like he coughs up like fur balls. And if he doesn't like a tail, he chucks it. He has like a special trash area. Well, that makes him a clean animal. I continued my digging with renewed energy. I should yet find the grand depot where all these passages centered. But the farther I excavated, the more complex and baffling the problem became, and the ground was honeycombed with passages. What enemy has this weasel, I said to myself, that he should provide so many ways of escape, that he should have a back door at every turn? To corner him would be impossible. To be lost in his fortress was like being lost in Mammoth Cave. How he could bewilder his pursuer by appearing now at this door, now at that, now mocking him from the attic, now defying him from the cellar. So far, I had discovered but one entrance, but some of the chambers were so near the surface that it looked as if the planner had calculated upon an emergency when he might have to reach daylight quickly in a new place. Finally, I paused, rested upon my shovel for a while, eased my aching back upon the ground, and then gave it up, feeling as I never had before the force of the old saying that you cannot catch a weasel asleep. I had made an ugly hole in the bank, had handled 2 or 3 times a ton or more of earth, and was apparently no nearer the weasel and his store of mice than when I began. Then I regretted that I had broken into his castle at all, that I had not contented myself with coming day after day and counting his mice as he carried them in, and continued my observation upon him each succeeding year. Now the rent in his fortress could not be repaired, and he would doubtless move away, as he most certainly did, for his doors, which I had closed with soil, remained unopened after winter had set in. But little seems known about the intimate, private lives of any of our lesser wild creatures. It was news to me that any of the weasels lived in dens in this way, and that they stored up provisions against a day of need. This species was probably the little ermine, 8 or 9 inches long, with tail about 5 inches. It was still in its summer dress of dark chestnut brown above and whitish below. It was a mystery where the creature had put the earth which it must have removed in digging its den. Not a grain was to be seen anywhere, and yet a bushel or more must have been taken out. Externally, there was not the slightest sign of that curious habitation there under the ground. The entrance was hidden beneath the dry leaves. and was surrounded by little passages and flourishes between the leaves and the ground. If any of my readers find a weasel's den, I hope they will be wiser than I was and observe his goings and comings without disturbing his habitation. Now I'm going to stop there at page 73, and I'll continue on our next reading, and we'll finish up about the weasel and find out just how vicious a fighter he can be. All right. God bless you. Happy Easter. Happy Resurrection Day. Bye bye.